And actually, conflict is not bad. Conflict is important. It's critical. Healthy conflict is exactly what we want. And that's about how we navigate those tension points. What you want to avoid, and I've had this situation where if you wait too long, you can be at an offsite with the team and two founders stand up and are yelling at each other. And literally have had to stand between them to yeah.
So you're a bouncer now too, huh?
And the good news is they're committed to doing the work. And so you can land that and you can repair it.
That was Ian Schmidt, a strategic advisor at Trimergence, which is a consulting firm that specializes in leadership and corporate culture development. We were excited to have Ian on to discuss how founders can better work with their co-founders or really anyone on their team. Ian focuses on the human side of scaling a business because at the end of the day, a startup is really only as strong as the relationships between the people who are building it. We talked about specific tools founders can use to ensure they're effectively resolving conflict, building an internal feedback culture, and doing the work on themselves so they can operate at their highest level. I'm your host, Isabelle Johannessen, and you're listening to Build Mode, and this season is all about growing your team. I want to remind all the Build Mode listeners that applications for the Startup Battlefield are now open. So if you're building an early stage company or have an MVP, apply for the program at techcrunch.com/apply. If you want to take these conversations beyond the podcast, then come join us in person at a TechCrunch event. October 13 to 15 in San Francisco, we're back for TechCrunch Disrupt, where the Startup Battlefield 200 takes the stage. So if you want to cheer them on or just network with thousands of founders and VCs and tech enthusiasts, then grab your tickets at techcrunch.com/events and use code BuildMode15 for 15% off any ticket type. And that discount is exclusively for you Build Mode listeners, and we'd love to see you there. Hi, Ian. Welcome to Build Mode.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could join us. If you can just kick things off by introducing yourself and giving us a little overview of your background.
Sure. I'm a partner at a consulting firm called Trimergence, and we focus on the human side of scaling businesses. And if you think about it, businesses have a human operating system. And that human operating system needs an upgrade process over time, just like the product does, and your go-to-market strategy. So we work with leaders and teams to map their operating system, how they think, how they manage conflict, how they do decision-making, and really provide them with what we call a noise reduction algorithm. So helping them get better results faster by making sure that they're connected and they are getting the best throughput in the way they relate to each other in solving problems, going to market, and figuring out their product.
Wow. I love how you speak founder language when you explain that. I feel like there's so many ways you could describe what you do, but explaining it in the way that founders think and Silicon Valley tech founders, the way they operate. I love that. So how did you get into this? What is your path?
Yeah, so my path was, first of all, I'm the son of a clinical psychologist who started working with leaders many, many years ago. And I grew up in Silicon Valley here in Mountain View. And my father always talked about the psychology of outstanding performers. So it was a dinner table conversation. And then fast forward, I spent 10 years in startups myself, going public, getting ready to go public, getting acquired, downsizing dramatically, that whole ride. And I really have had a passion over the last 20 years doing this consulting to consult back to startups and high growth companies to really focus on that human side. Because I saw so much focus on what's our product market fit, do we need to pivot, et cetera, which is important and critical. But also it's that human factor that I've seen so many companies either fail or slow down their progress, or when they do it right, it really accelerates and helps them bend the curve.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main reasons that startups fail these days is because of co-founder conflict and not being able to agree on decisions and co-founders, leaving for various reasons. I'm curious if you've seen any patterns or sort of common themes in your work for major disputes that co-founders have, or if I'm sure, it's different in every situation, but if there's a few big pitfalls that you've seen.
Yeah, some patterns can be really when founders are unclear about who owns what and how they're going to navigate disagreement about what the other founder owns, or when a position or perspective is being really driven hard into the company. And so if there isn't a framework to navigate that conflict, then you're going to run into not just a tension point, but over time, we think of it as, you build up tech debt when it comes to the technology, you build up relational debt.
And so you work with co-founders in sort of a coaching capacity. Tell me what that looks like. You get on a Zoom call once a week and they tell you about their problems like therapy? I mean, what does that entail?
Yeah, we like to take a systematic approach. And that systematic approach is first, before working in the relational domain, is helping the founder map their own personal operating system. So what makes them tick? What's at the core or the kernel of who they are? And how do those traits show up as gifts, and how do they show up as challenges? And then once they've done their own self-inquiry around, okay, this is how I am in the world, and here are the blind spots that I know I have, and both founders have done that, then that sets a great foundation to bring them together to talk about, okay, what do you need from each other? What does it look like when you trigger each other? How are you going to navigate those moments? What tools are you going to reach for when that happens? And then making explicit agreements. Okay, we call it relationship synchronizing. Here are my agreements. This is what I can do for you to show up better. Here's what you can do for me. And then here's what's unique about our working relationship that contributes in an extraordinary way to the organization. And this is how we need to come together to make that magic happen. And then memorialize those so that then that becomes a touchstone, and keep it simple, right? One page. Here's how we're going to operate together, and then do check-ins over time.
Wow. So it really is couples therapy in many ways. So do you work with them individually yourself and then bring them together, or are they expected to sort of do their individual work on their own?
I or we on my team will work with them individually, and then you go deep there. Then you come together and do the relationship synchronizing, and then you move out into, okay, what's our team dynamic? And there's an ebb and flow of going into the individual work, working at the relational level, coming back to the individual work. As I say, it's an ongoing OS upgrade. So you need a cadence.
It sounds like it can also take a long time. Sometimes some people are not as ready for those personal insights as others. I'm curious how long you typically work with clients.
Well, there's a couple of different things in that question, right? One is it takes time. And a lot of founders out there, I'm sure, are saying, look, I don't have time to go there. And what we found is can't afford not to go there, right? That it actually saves time. And I think of it in tens, like what's a nugget you can take away from self-awareness that'll help you in the next 10 hours or 10 days or 10 months? Or in some cases, if you build a really strong relationship, I've seen a founder and an early engineer go on for 10 years in an extraordinary collaborative relationship where then that engineer was part of the senior executive team. So those investments pay off short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And then as far as how we work, we have clients that we've worked with for, in some cases, 20 years.
And imagine it's almost probably a little addictive, right? Once you start getting all these epiphanies and enlightenment and it becomes so much easier to work with your co-founder and team is succeeding, I would keep coming back and and wanting to dig deeper, but maybe that's my own brand of crazy. But
well, you hit on something that's really important, which is it's addictive because you're growing.
Yeah.
And you're growing not as a leader. I just got a text from a young founder that I'm working with, and she's like, I'm making better decisions. I'm flowing with, I get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm flowing more powerfully into the work. There's a reduction in noise and how I show up with the rest of the team. And the bigger piece is she's like, my identity is no longer fused to the outcome of the company. I've actually now expanded my sense of self beyond that. And I'm better in making my audacious goal happen, but it's positively impacting who I am and who I'm becoming. So I think that's the part that gets really addictive. And then when we talk about siblings and partnering with friends and spouses, it becomes even more either addictive or critical. I would say.
That's a buy one, get one free co-founder and couple therapy. Yeah, I can imagine. So I'm curious how people come to you. Again, founders, like you pointed out, are busy and may not feel like they have time for this and whatever. But when there's a real conflict, then it's sort of in your face. You can't avoid it. We need to go talk to someone like yourself. Or are there people who maybe are coming earlier but trying to avoid conflict from day one? Or is it sort of, waiting until there is a fire burning that needs to be put out?
Yeah, great point. So first of all, we're huge fans, and we're going to push the perspective that get started early. And you'll notice what happens even in our conversation. We're talking a lot about conflict, because that's the point at which people are like, oh yeah, we've got to do something, right? And wouldn't it be awesome if we laid the groundwork, this noise reduction algorithm, in advance to really reduce that conflict? And actually, conflict is not bad. Conflict is important. It's critical. Healthy conflict is exactly what we want. And that's about how we navigate those tension points. So what you want to avoid, and I've had this situation where if you wait too long, you can be at an offsite with the team and two founders stand up and are yelling at each other. And literally have had to stand between them to oh yeah.
So you're a bouncer now too, huh?
And the good news is they're committed to doing the work. And so you can land that and you can repair. But think about the collateral reverberations and damage and repair that needs to happen after something like that. So
yeah, that's not a great look to the rest of the team. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, not a good look.
So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the maybe examples or use cases that you think might be applicable to other founders, right? So fighting over equity to begin with, probably, I imagine, is something that's bare bones conflict. And then deciding which, products to launch, which industries to go in, how to manage teams. I mean, what are some of the sort of inflection points that you often see conflict arise?
Yeah. And I think another big one is who's going to lead, right? Who's going to take the CEO seat, right? I think that's one big conflict. Another conflict is over time, are you able to really deliver in the role that you're in? Because as you grow and evolve, sometimes you might be the 0 to 1 person in that role, but you might not be the 1 to 10. And I think this is where the evolving self-awareness and that personal OS operating upgrade is so important, as well as the relational, because what I've seen is working with organizations that evolve over time is 2 of the 3 founders are there. And why? Because one of that couldn't quite work it out with the third founder, and it got crunchy, and they left of their own volition, or they kind of got pushed out, right? And if we can, there's so much power in the original band, so to speak. And sometimes it's time for other people to move on. But when it's not conscious and desired, then there can be a huge loss there.
Yeah. And I can imagine it's like a friendship breakup at 10x.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of personal stuff involved. It's not just business at the end of that relationship.
That's right. And so often it is friendship.
Yeah. What have you seen in the scope of, solo founders to double founder, co-founders, 3, 4? I mean, I've seen people who try to apply for Battlefield with 6 co-founders, and I'm thinking I'm a little wary of that.
Wow. Yeah.
Not a little, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But what have you seen as kind of a good secret sauce, a good combination? Is 4 too many chefs in the kitchen? Is 3 a good place to be?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know if I can comment on here's the, I might defer to my investor friends to get that kind of pattern matching. But what I would say is the more founders you have, the more critical it is that you have this dedication to the relational dynamic and upgrading that over time. And if you don't have that platform, you're taking on a lot of risk.
Mm. And what about, co-founders who are quite similar to each other? I think these days I see a lot of very technical co-founders who then find themselves a business founder to help kind of grow and pitch the company, because they themselves may not be the one who likes to get up at Startup Battlefield and pitch on stage. And so they're very different backgrounds and personalities and skill sets. And it usually seems like it's pretty obvious in that case who will be the CEO and who will be the CTO. But I'm curious what maybe differences you've seen between founders who are similar in background and very different.
If you're similar in background, that there's an advantage there because you can kind of finish each other's sentences, right? the downside is you're missing part of the equation. And if you're not careful, you could get into a little bit of groupthink. And you really need to check yourselves. This is where the evolving self-awareness is so critical, and the relationship synchronizing, so you can really identify explicitly, like, this is what we're missing, and this is what we need to invite in from a diversity perspective. I think that's absolutely critical success factor.
Yeah, but I can imagine on the flip side, too, that when you have co-founders who are very different, right, from background by skill set, I mean, personality, everything, it's sort of, conflict might be easier to navigate in a sense that, you are your domain expert in this. I will defer to you on those decisions because you know better, versus when they're sort of similar, that there are more points of tension because, we think the same. And, if we're going to disagree, who kind of owns that piece of the authority in the company?
That can be a dynamic, particularly if folks are good at trusting each other to captain their domain. Sometimes that trust is wobbly. That's why the relationship synchronizing is so important, because if I have a deeper sense of who you are, how you operate, and also how you're different from a style perspective, then I can accurately interpret you and not project onto you, and then want to get up in your business and start second guessing you. And this, the beauty of diversity is we're different, and we bring the creative magic of the two of us together is exponential, right? The downside of it is I may not totally get how you operate and who you are. I forget that you're not like me. And so then when I get triggered, I can start to project onto you and potentially be misinterpreting what you're really trying to accomplish or what your motivations are.
Let's dig into some of these sort of tools and frameworks, because now I'm picturing, the perfect diverse team where we've got all the different skill sets and backgrounds and, the beauty of the bouquet that comes with that. How, where do you start? What kind of challenges do you approach first, and what sort of frameworks do you help introduce them to?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we try to start before there's some big challenge or tension point. The first step is mapping your personal, individual operating system. How do you tick? What are your gifts? What are your challenges? And having deep, honest conversations with yourself. Like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. And not just from a expertise perspective, but how I communicate, how I lead people, what happens when I'm triggered and fired up in a meeting, all of those different dynamics, actually map those out, get them down into one page. We're big fans of pick a toolkit that everybody can standardize across, but then also boil it down. You got to make it quick, easy to reference so you can keep moving fast, right? Second is get in a room together. And again, not just the team offsite. We feel like the missing piece is people might do work one-on-one with a coach, and then they might do an offsite. And this relationship synchronizing is so critical, which is the relationship I have with you is different than the relationship I might have with somebody else. And we need to go deep on that. So doing the personal work and pick a framework or a model that works well and resonates for you and the rest of the team. Then get in a room and have a scaffolded conversation about here's what's working, here's what needs to improve, here's the latent potential. And then, as I mentioned earlier, document those, and then have some sort of ongoing cadence where you're checking in with each other. It might be quarterly. It might be at least once every half. And then all of that flows into the offsites that you have throughout the year. The other thing I think that's really important is through that process is building in a sense of an internal 360, where you're raising your own consciousness to see how you're showing up and impacting other people. And after the fact, reflecting, holding yourself accountable, circling back and doing repair if that's what's needed, and making sure that the throughput is clean, right? And then finally there's a place for 360s, and we do 360s, but I always say that's a great starting point and a commencement for cultivating a culture of feedback, so that there's a ongoing data feed between you and everybody else on the team, so that hopefully if we were to do a 360 again at some point, you'd look at it and be like, yep, yeah, I know all that. No, heard that, right? So that those honest conversations with each other along the way and not waiting.
Yeah, it seems like, 360s are sort of the bare minimum that companies have to do. That, we get it. Every year you have to check in, but to be able to have it be sort of a part of the culture to check in more regularly. I want to sort of, double click on this idea of repair, because I think there are a lot of founders who, again, are so busy and they're kind of just making rash decisions without having gone through this process or taken a lot of time to build these frameworks just yet. And they might be listening to this podcast being like, oh, shoot, I got some repair to do and now I'm thinking about it. Once someone realizes that they've maybe, I don't want to say been a bad influence, but like you said, like maybe lashed out in front of their employees and needs to kind of come back with their tail between their legs and make some repairs, how should they go about approaching that?
Well, first of all, just recognizing it is a huge step. That's this internal 360. So that's a huge step in and of itself. Then the question is, now what do I do? Right. And I think the first step is to slow down and pause and do a little inventory. Okay, here's what I think happened. This is how I might have impacted others. How does this relate to something that I know about myself? Oh, my partner tells me this all the time, or I've seen this over time growing up, or I've received this feedback before. So you have both the situation and the pattern, right? Because you're going to go and try to repair the situation or address the situation. But what you want to do is heighten that self-awareness to evolve through and past that pattern over time. Then go and sit down with the person and take ownership and ask what their experience was. Here's what I think happened. This is how it might have impacted you. I want to own that, and I want to understand how that landed. Sometimes it's worse than you thought. Sometimes it's not as bad as you thought. But the biggest thing is there's whatever the content is, the thing where we argued about or the way I showed up, but the process of me coming to you and saying, hey, that didn't really go the way I wanted it to, and I want to make sure we're good and what's going on for you, that builds a lot of trust. Because it's like, oh, okay, you see it. Now I trust you more. I didn't like that, but now I trust you more. Or if you're hypercritical and hypersensitive, like a lot of founders are, folks may say, hey, no, that was fine. That was within the zone. Don't sweat it. Then you can calibrate your internal 360 to figure out when you're really in the zone or out of the zone in general, and then more specifically with certain individuals.
I want to sort of pivot back to when we were talking about, married co-founders, sibling co-founders. So, I mean, obviously this is a small portion of the co-founder community, if you will. Yeah. But I do think it's interesting to kind of use those examples as almost use cases for other co-founder relationships, because when we were talking to, the sister co-founders, they have had, probably 30 years of life navigating conflict, and they know each other inside and out, and how that shows up in a co-founder relationship. And even married couples, right? Like, they live together, they go home at the end of the day. How to separate church and state in those two, their two realms. What have you seen in maybe clients or just, from your own experience, co-founders that have sort of unique relationships?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have this amazing established foundation of trust, connection, deeper purpose, shared purpose. That's beautiful. That's irreplaceable. And you want to make sure that you have very explicit ways in which you're navigating those dynamics, because as we talked about earlier, you could end up losing friends. You could end up with some sort of rift with your sibling or with your romantic partner. And that's not uncommon outside of working together every day.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard enough as is. But...
That's right. That's right. My sister and I talk about how fortunate we feel for how close we are, because that's not always the case with siblings, right? And I think the recommendation would be, one, to be explicit about what you need in the business context in the boardroom versus what you want and need, and maybe even doing some visioning about what you want and need outside of that. Are you going to, do you have a safe word to turn off the work speak? Are you going to set particular times or containers or situations where it's like, hey, we're just hanging out? And I would say that, and we see this with friends who've worked together for decades, in addition to siblings and what have you, where it's like, hey, I know you inside and out. We can just keep running. And yet there's still latent potential. So the investment in, again, growing your self-awareness and then having those relationship synchronizing scaffolded sessions and check-ins is critical, because there's always something, even if it's going great. I've seen it with folks who've worked together for 20 years. It's like, oh, there's this nugget. Like, I didn't realize that we could, there's an unlock here that we missed because it's so good, right? And I think the final thing I would say is you do want to be really well scaffolded for when the tensions get really high, because now when you're dealing with conflict, the stakes are so much higher. Like, wow, we could lose the company and I could lose you, right? And that increases pressure, and that pressure tends to cause us to not show up at our best. And then we get scared because the stakes are so high, and you can start to see that spiral.
I love this idea of, the latent potential and the nugget unlocking, because I think so often people think of, the sort of coaching when there's conflict, when it's negative, when we need to solve a problem, rather than using it as a way to grow your business, which is, as a founder, is your job and is what your investors expect of you, your customers expect, your team, and to use this as a tool for growth rather than a problem solution. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, you're like, oh yeah, have people find you, and like when they're in conflict or what have you. And I made the, hey, get started early before the conflict. There can be a sense that I have a gap or there's a problem, and so we need a fix. And what I want to help people understand is this is rocket fuel to help you get better results faster in a much more fulfilling and sustainable way. And oh, by the way, it's a noise reduction algorithm that will help you when you have conflict, and you'll have the foundation for that. And so I like to flip the script there and say, this is about bending the curve. It's how do you grow yourself so you can grow the organization better and faster? How do you become an exponential you if you want an exponentially growing organization?
I want to circle back to this sort of, relationship founder situation, because I keep thinking that, when co-founders who are not married or siblings or anything like that, they have their partners and their siblings outside of the co-founder relationship, and, that they can bounce ideas off of and kind of get outside opinions. And so their circle of trust, their personal board of advisors, if you will, is broader. There's more diversity in that than having it all be, consolidated in one person. And I'm always sort of curious, I think a lot of co-founders, it's a lonely ride in many ways. Even if your co-founder is your best friend or your partner or whatever, that almost might be lonelier, because, who else do you talk to about these problems? I wonder what you advise founders in terms of building their own personal network, people they trust to be able to talk about things, whether it's, of course, to talk about business things, they need someone who is probably experienced in this and finding, sort of these shadow CEOs who've been there, done that, but also on the personal side.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, which is, what is your support network? And looking for those types of relationships where you can build really deep trust and talk about what's really going on for you inside. And that's one of the reasons I appreciate, I thought you did a great job in season 1 of not only showing tools, tactics, and ways to be successful, but the human side of what it means to be on the founder journey, and getting real like that and finding that collection of folks. And this is where the evolving self-awareness is so important, is the more you get deep and honest and vulnerable with yourself and kind of get it out, then the more courageous you're going to be to let other people in on what's really going on. Because a lot of founders, it's lonely. They're under extraordinary pressure. As I mentioned earlier, their identity may be fused with the outcome of the company. And it's very common and it's navigable. People have been there before, but it takes asking for help and reaching out and cultivating those trusted relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I hear a lot about founders finding other groups of founders, because it seems like they're the only ones who can relate to this kind of wild ride of being a founder. But I'm sure there are, different aspects of life and of company building. I mean, there's probably times where they want to go talk to someone who's been an executive at a big tech company. How did you scale this? Like, I think that path for for business growth mentorship is so much clearer. You have these advisors and, but on the personal side, I imagine it's much, much harder.
Yeah, and I definitely celebrate finding other founders who are going, and that's what I liked about season one, finding other founders that are going through similar, there's everybody wants to try to figure out what's the blueprint to hyperscale. But what's the blueprint to navigate the fact that at times I might feel powerless, or other times I'm terrified, and those moments when there's so much rage, or I feel shame that things didn't go the way it is. Like, how do we? And we're fans of, we think of three legs of the stool. There's the self-awareness, the relational skill, and then that map for what am I feeling inside, and how do I transmute that to a sense of power and exhilaration and compassion. Being able to do that in community is so powerful, because I think most of us, not just founders, but most of us in life sort of feel like, oh, it's just me. I'm the only one who's feeling this, right?
I want to talk more about this idea of, separating one's self and identity from the success of the company, because I think even those of us who don't run companies probably feel that in your own careers, right? When projects fail, you take it personally and, try not to. When you succeed, it feels great. But especially with being a founder, that, if something isn't going right, you might even feel incredibly guilty that the team is, not getting their bonuses or whatever it may be. And there's so much tied to you personally as the face of the company and the starter of this, wild company that you've built. How do you sort of work founders through detaching?
Well, a couple of different levels. First off is why are you doing what you're doing? Like, what's the deeper and kind of the five whys, right? Why did you start this? Why is this meaningful? What does this mean to you as a human at the core? And stopping to do that, because I think we can get spun into the doing and the manifesting, and not taking time to do that kind of inquiry. I think the other angle I work with founders on is, who do you get to become through this process? And not just as a great company builder or someone who's building the next extraordinary product, but who do you get to become as a human being? Because if you can crack the code on that and you can relate to that, then you can see everything as a growth and learning opportunity versus, hey, I hit the mark or I missed the mark. And then beating ourselves up for that, or getting scared because I'm further off the mark. I'm not going to make it. We're not going to go public. Like, well, wait a minute. How am I showing up? How am I growing and building a foundation of what it means to contribute not only to the company, but more broadly to life? And how can I feel vital in that? Because once you do that, then you're unstoppable.
In Startup Battlefield, we like to choose companies that are very mission driven and are changing the world and all these things. But of course, there are also the very investor friendly, high growth SaaS companies, enterprise, this and that, right? And I think what I've seen, what you were just talking about, of founders who really feel like they're contributing to the world and making it a better place, that building very mission driven companies, often health tech, climate tech, things like that, have a very strong why, and like can go through hellfire because of that why, and maybe have lived the problem themselves, or really deeply connected to the problem. And I think that in itself is motivation. I am curious though, if you have examples or experience with founders who are more on this hyper growth, hyper scale side, where it is more about growth and profits, and you have a lot of investor pressure, and it's a very different game from those who are like, maybe I'm not even taking VC money, I'm just in it because I'm passionate about what we're building, versus all the pressures in the world. We need to scale and grow and exit as fast as possible.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say, Startup Battlefield, amazing what you and the team are doing with that. That's incredible to find entrepreneurs from all over the world and give them a global stage, help them refine their story. It's amazing. You're changing lives. That's a great purpose.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's really, really awesome. And yeah, when I speak of purpose, sure, it's obvious and clear when it's a startup to try to solve world hunger or whatever it might be, right? But there's so much purpose in hey, I'm under a lot of pressure from the board and we're trying to hyperscale this company. My purpose is to be able to shepherd this through to fruition and to do it in a way where people are engaged and involved and feel that they can bring their greatest gifts to work. That's a great purpose, even if it's for a widget that isn't so obviously solving some human calamity, right? That kind of purpose. The purpose might be because it's there. I'm Mount Everest. I want to climb it, right? Great. Well, do you want to climb it and then be spent and die at the peak? Or do you want to climb it and be able to come down and then show others the way? And what does that make possible and provide for people's families? And there's all kinds of things that happen in these high growth companies that are really beautiful purpose, that don't necessarily have to be this, solving a world problem, if you will, or a problem of humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah. Find your personal motivation and your personal challenge, yeah. So when we met the other day, we were talking about, mindfulness and meditation and all these things that we geeked out on. But I was telling you that I'm doing this 30-day mindfulness course, right? And they have sort of weekly challenges that get more and more extreme as we go through the month. And it's sort of, a checklist of daily things, right? Like hydrate, journal, move your body, things like that. I'm curious if you can or if you have a maybe daily checklist for early stage founders of things that they should do to sort of start this journey, to check in with themselves. Maybe one of the tasks is something to relate with their co-founder or their team, maybe 3 to 5 things that founders should do daily.
I'm a huge fan of a morning routine because it really sets the tone for the day, obviously. And I find that some sort of way of connecting to the body and getting out of the head. So for some, that's meditation. For others, it's, and I'm a big fan of breath work and some sort of way to really, really drop into the vitality of life and then move into, okay, what is it that I want to accomplish for the day? How do I want to show up? So there's what I want to do and who I want to be. Because I think we tend to create our lists of this needs to get done.
Right.
But how do I want to go about doing that? What's my state of being? And just doing a little moment of visualizing or seeing yourself move through the day. And then I'm a huge fan, given the level of pressure everybody's in, is drop into your heart. A little bit of gratitude. What can you be grateful for? It's relationships. It's the beautiful flora and fauna around you. It's the amazing place we get to live in the world. Whatever it might be, simple or profound, just take 2-3 minutes and just think of all the things, and not just think, but feel into all the things that you're grateful for. And then I would say, and to translate that also into your company, don't forget to tell people what you're grateful for. See how that changes the tone in the boardroom, right? Because I think we're all trained to identify the gaps and the problems, and that's awesome. And what I found is companies and individuals don't take enough time to celebrate success and to drop into gratitude.
I completely agree. And I think that changes the motivation from employees from, the ground up, that, realizing that if I work hard, I will be recognized for it publicly, and they're grateful for my hard work. I mean, that can do wonders, just a few words from the leadership. So I think that's a really great tip.
Yeah. And on that point is particularly when it comes to conflict, but in general in life, people really want to be seen and heard. And, sometimes there's an attachment to trying to be right? But more importantly, people want to feel seen and heard. And when you express gratitude, you are really seeing what someone is delivering, and that lights them up. We know about what that does to the, biology of humans. And then also remember that when you're in conflict situations, a way of seeing somebody else is to fully hear them out. And that has a huge positive impact in navigating conflict situations as well.
I want to take a little bit of a turn. So I think, for founders that I've worked with, again, busy people, traveling a lot, conferences, all the things, sometimes this might sound like wishful thinking, right? To be able to have time and energy to like focus on these things, right? That we've talked about. Is there a certain point in which you advise founders to seek help in other aspects of their life in terms of maybe hiring, someone who can help them with their nutrition or fitness or a personal assistant in their personal life or things that are kind of like, I feel like in the workspace, in the company, it's obvious, right? We need to hire an EA. We need to hire a head of engineering. But then, founders often take their work home and everywhere else and on vacation to kind of say, you have a lot on your plate. Maybe you need to hire, a coach or go to a mindfulness retreat or I don't know, something.
Right now.
Okay.
And on a couple of different fronts. Well, first of all, you're also hitting on energy. The vitality and energy is your fundamental currency to be successful. And it's part of a morning routine. I'm also a big fan of get out there, work out. It could be, walking around the block outside, what have you. Anything you can do to make sure that you are maintaining your energy is key. And having other people take stuff off your plate or accelerate your success in those areas, fitness, nutrition, stuff around the house, outsource as much as you can so that you can really focus. So if we think about going deep on self-awareness, people say that, I don't have time. It's like, well, what are all the things that you're doing today that you could take off your plate that would free up time for that? Or I don't have time in the morning for a morning routine. What are those things that I can hire out that frees up my time, attention, and calories to focus on these things that are so important?
Yeah, I guess the question really was more about time management. So I'm glad you took it that direction because I'm thinking there are only so many hours in the day, right? And I've, often think when founders go home and work these, 996 crazy days and hours, what does that look like for the people in their lives that love them and maybe haven't seen them in 2 months because they're traveling and working constantly and being able to say no to things and really prioritize when I'm in founder mode and when I'm in family mode or whatever it may be.
Well, the other thing I would recommend is what's your strategy or approach to do kind of relationship synchronizing with those important relationships in your life outside of work so that you have a sense of what do they need? How are they experiencing you? What boundaries do you need to set for yourself in your life so you can spend more time with them? And what sort of expectations do you need to set with them so that it's clear and explicit? And again, there isn't that relational debt, kind of like tech debt, where you're moving so fast that you're starting to drift apart in these relationships and they're starting to get resentful or feeling ignored or what have you. If you have real conversations about that, then you can figure out a creative way to try to navigate that. See it with leaders all the time they're like, I'm making time for my family, but I'm not present with my family. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. My head's somewhere else. Oftentimes, they don't need a huge block of time, but what they need is total presence when you are there. And then they feel that, and that's enough for them. So talking that through, one, again, doing the self-reflection, and then two, talking that through with those around you, I think is critical.
So for the founders out there who say, they don't have time to prioritize the sort of founder coaching and really digging into their own strengths and weaknesses and all of these things, what was sort of your advice and your approach to how founders should consider their personal growth, the growth of the company?
Yeah, I always say scale yourself so you can scale the company, right? You need to be on your own exponential growth curve. And we hear this all the time. I don't have time right now. I'm going to kick the can down the road, or nothing's broken, right? And what I would say is the more you invest now with the power of compounding, you're going to save an enormous amount of time. I've seen it happen time and time again. And if you wait, it's actually going to end up messier and taking more time to clean up and reduce the noise. So that's one piece. The other piece is what we found is super powerful is if you have a set of tools that are very simple, that are potent, both for that self-awareness journey, for navigating the relational dynamic, and to sort of map and manage your internal state, that state of being when we get triggered. If you have that integrated and then you deploy it for yourselves and in the company as a platform, if you will, with kind of a standard methodology, that relationship and OS upgrade process can be super efficient and really effective. And what's great is what works with 2 founders, then that platform scales to 20, to 200 headcount, to 2,000, and we've seen it beyond. We've had clients for 20 years with the same platform. So make it super, super efficient and effective. And I guarantee you it's going to save time. It's going to help you get better results faster. It's going to unlock all kinds of energy, and it's going to be a lot more fun and fulfilling.
I love this idea of, when you do the work on yourself, it spreads to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. I think that's important in just non-business context as well, but especially when you're the founder of this company, the leader, the face, the figurehead of this company, the work you do on yourself will then spread to your co-founders, to your teammates, to your customers, and really to sort of take that seriously.
Well, and at the end of the day, your culture is how you interact and how your feet move. It's not the values that you put on the wall or what have you. Everybody's watching the founder and the core team, like that's the culture, right? And so, yeah, you want it to be as clean and that noise reduction algorithm, and you're really juicing up what you're all here to do.
All right, well, this has been fantastic, Ian. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Build Mode is a TechCrunch podcast. Each episode is produced and edited by Maggie Nye and hosted by me, Isabelle Johannessen. Our art and design is also by Maggie Nye. A big thanks to Morgan Little, who leads our audience development, the Foundry and Cheddar video teams, and most of all to you, the builders, and everyone else in the wider startup community. We'll see you back here next time.